Hello, my name is Philip Dawson, and I'm the policy lead at the Schwartz Reisman Institute for Technology and Society. I'm pleased to be here to talk to you about the global effort to regulate AI. Today, we will begin to unpack some of the leading initiatives by international organizations, multilateral bodies, and, more recently, by governments that seek to better understand AI, the opportunities and challenges it brings, and to design ways of ensuring its responsible use in society. So why did this become a global effort? Well, we've come to realize that artificial intelligence can create significant benefits, both for social and economic progress. AI's predictive power can be used to enhance drug discovery. It can be used in precision agriculture to improve farming. Some companies are using AI to decarbonize manufacturing of cement and steel. AI can also help create more efficient energy systems for buildings, or sustainable transit in cities. AI-based personalization of financial services can enhance financial inclusion, yielding new opportunities for the unbanked. International organizations believe that AI can play a critical role in accelerating progress on advancing the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And these are just some of the positive developments associated with the commercial use of AI. In fact, a recent study by PricewaterhouseCoopers noted that AI advances are likely to produce a 26% increase in global GDP, or $16 trillion US. So, as you can see, there's a tremendous opportunity associated with investments in AI, research, and commercialization. At the same time, we have also become more aware of AI harms. Some of the most prominent harms include the proliferation of harassment, disinformation, and divisive and harmful content online. AI also has the potential to reinforce discriminatory outcomes in society, where biased data or models risk excluding protected groups from financial services, hiring process, access to public services, or even the administration of justice. AI is also changing the future of work and the skills that individuals will need in the future to participate meaningfully in the digital economy. Other companies have made progress developing large, powerful language models, such as GPT-3, which can behave and evolve in unpredictable ways, and controls for these systems are lagging behind. There are a number of larger scale harms and dangers of global importance that we will not spend a lot of time discussing today, related to state use of AI, such as state-sponsored surveillance, or the use of lethal autonomous weapons. These are some of the very serious concerns that the malign use of AI also triggers. So global efforts to regulate AI seek to address one fundamental question. How can we guide the design, development, and use of AI systems to harness its potential benefits while eliminating harms and minimizing risks? This will be a familiar question for some of you. It is the subject of many workshops, conferences, and academic papers that regulators and stakeholders across the world have been trying to unpack for years now. To give you a sense of the scale of this effort, since 2017, over 50 countries have developed national AI strategies. Many of these strategies aim to drive responsible development of AI through the coordination of policies, investments into research, talent development and training, and public discussion about the ethical impacts of AI on society. Canada was actually the first such country to develop a national AI strategy, with the Pan-Canadian AI Strategy in 2017. More recently, countries developing national AI strategies have also focused on what regulatory approaches for AI might be necessary to protect the considerable investments that both the public and private sectors have made into AI research and commercialization. At the same time, there have been a growing amount of international and multilateral AI initiatives. These are just a few of the key international organizations who have played leadership roles developing international norms and soft law that will help guide domestic efforts by governments. UNESCO, a specialized agency of the United Nations comprised of 193 countries, recently adopted a recommendation on AI ethics. The Freedom Online Coalition, a multilateral alliance of states which Canada currently chairs, has published a number of statements and calls to action to guide the responsible development of AI systems, both on social media and in the marketplace at large. In 2019, the OECD developed its own recommendation on AI to ensure its trustworthy design and development. Through the G7, the governments of Canada and of France spearheaded the founding of the Global Partnership on AI, a new multilateral alliance of 25 countries now, committed to implementing the OECD AI principles through large-scale applied research projects. Let's take a closer look at the OECD AI principles. They talk about the need to ensure inclusive growth, sustainable development, well-being, human-centered values and fairness, which are described as including privacy and data protection, or respect for human rights, the rule of law, and democracy, or principles of transparency and explainability. The right for individuals to know when they're interacting with an AI system, or to understand how the AI system has been used in a decision that impacts their rights, financial well-being, or health. Other principles highlight the importance of the robustness, security, and safety of an AI system. Can it withstand adversarial attacks? How well does it perform across different datasets and domains? What are the potential impacts of the system on physical safety? The OECD AI principles were the first series of principles signed on to by governments. They were endorsed by the G20, and beyond OECD member states, a number of other countries across the world have adhered to these principles, including Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, Peru, and Romania. In parallel with the development of the OECD AI principles, the European Commission established a high-level expert group to develop a series of ethical guidelines for trustworthy AI. The ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI set out 3 components for trustworthy AI. AI must be lawful, it must be ethical, and it must be technically robust. The guidelines are founded on 4 ethical principles and 7 key technical requirements, which really mirror the content of the OECD AI principles. But the European Commission effort went a little bit further in developing an assessment list designed to enable organizations to implement the guidelines in their internal governance policies and procedures. So, we've just reviewed 2 of the most significant AI principles and ethical frameworks efforts undertaken internationally to date, from the OECD and from the European Commission High-Level Expert Group. Since 2019, though, there have been over 170 such efforts from governments, academia, industry, and civil society. Many of these are reflected on this figure from the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, which demonstrates how, despite the proliferation of AI principles, there has actually been remarkable consistency across approaches. In some ways, the development of AI principles was in fact the easy part. The real challenge is for governments to take these principles and translate them into effective regulatory systems for AI. Next, we're going to look at some of the regulatory efforts coming out of the European Commission, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Since the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, came into force in 2018, the European Commission has pursued an aggressive regulatory agenda. Since December 2020, the Commission has tabled 4 distinct acts that have interrelated impacts on the use of AI systems. We're going to focus on aspects of the Digital Services Act and the Artificial Intelligence Act. However, both the GDPR, which includes rules for the processing of personal data by automated decision-making systems, and the Data Governance Act, which seeks to open up access to high-value datasets in the EU, should also be noted as part of the Brussels effect on the global digital regulatory landscape. Let's take a closer look at the EU's proposed Artificial Intelligence Act, which is the first comprehensive regulatory proposal for AI in the world. The EU AI Act takes a risk-based approach aimed at protecting the safety, health, and fundamental rights of European citizens. Obligations of AI developers and users are defined by a particular system's risk category, and there are 3 broad categories defined in the Act. Developers or users of low and minimal risk systems will have basic transparency reporting obligations. These include AI applications currently used throughout the business world, such as AI chatbots and AI-powered inventory management. High-risk systems must undergo pre-market conformity assessments, attesting to compliance with all of the Act's obligations. High-risk systems include AI systems incorporated into critical infrastructure or medical devices, those used in education or which pose a risk to health, safety, and fundamental rights more broadly, such as remote biometric identification or credit scoring, or even AI systems used to make hiring decisions. There is also a category of systems that are prohibited outright. These AI systems are deemed to pose unacceptable risks to society. They include systems that manipulate through subliminal techniques, systems that are used for social scoring, real-time remote biometric identification, and systems used in public spaces by law enforcement. Now let's take a closer look at high-risk AI systems. In the Act, a high-risk system would be subject to the following requirements: risk assessment and mitigation measures, data quality and data governance rules, logging activity to ensure traceability of results, detailed technical documentation, transparency requirements, appropriate human oversight to minimize risk, as well as high levels of robustness, security, and accuracy. In addition to pre-market conformity assessments, providers of high-risk AI systems must undertake post-market monitoring, reporting, and submit reports on their efforts to regulators. The EU AI Act is also explicit in the way that it intends to leverage the development of technical standards and conformity assessments to support compliance with the Act's requirements. For high-risk systems, conformity with international standards will in certain cases create a presumption of conformity with the Act. This table outlines some of the key requirements of the Act and maps them against the development of technical standards by international standards bodies such as the ISO and the IEEE, including in areas such as privacy and data governance, transparency, quality management, risk management, and human oversight. Many of these standards development processes have only just begun. Next, we'll look at the EU's proposed Digital Services Act. The Digital Services Act introduces new rules for online platforms to ensure the safety and protection of fundamental rights of European citizens online. The Act includes a number of measures related to the regulation of AI systems. Specifically, Article 26 of the Act requires that large online platforms, those having 45 million active monthly users in the EU or more, conduct annual risk assessments that take into account the impact of AI-driven content moderation. It also requires the platforms to take appropriate mitigation measures to manage risks. Article 31 of the Act requires the platforms to provide independent researchers with access to platform data and models for the purpose of conducting studies on the impacts of recommender systems that curate and deliver content in order to foster a better understanding of the systemic risks that they pose and to scrutinize compliance. The United Kingdom recently published their national AI strategy, which articulates an emerging approach to regulating AI in the UK. The UK government intends to publish a white paper outlining a pro-innovation position to regulating AI sometime in early 2022. This has come after some reflection regarding the inadequacies of taking a sectoral approach to regulating AI, and consideration of the need for horizontal framework across the marketplace to avoid confusion and duplication of overlapping rules in different sectors. The need for horizontal rules implies that the regulatory landscape related to AI is actually much broader than the privacy and data protection context. The UK national strategy also cites the need to ensure that national commercial interests are not supplanted by global regulatory efforts. The UK Centre for Data Ethics and Innovation, a government agency, recently published an AI assurance roadmap, clarifying the set of activities needed to build a competitive market for AI assurance services that leverage technical standards, conformity assessments, and certification. The UK approach reflects the important investments needed into technical standards development, the testing of AI systems, and pilot programs as a basis for building AI regulatory and assurance frameworks from the ground up. A partnership between the British Standards Institute, the UK's national standards body, and the Alan Turing Institute, the UK's National AI Institute, was announced in January 2022 to develop an AI standards hub to help accelerate progress on building out AI assurance and compliance tools. In October 2021, the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy opened a consultation on the development of a Bill of Rights for an AI-powered world. As part of the consultation, the White House released a sample of potential rights to be considered, including the right to know when and how AI is influencing a decision that affects civil rights or civil liberties, the freedom from being subjected to AI that hasn't been carefully audited, freedom from pervasive or discriminatory surveillance and monitoring in one's home, community, and workplace, as well as the right to meaningful recourse in the event that an AI system has contributed to harm. These are just some of the examples of new protections and derivative rights that we might need to incorporate across a broad scope of laws and regulations related to the development and use of AI systems. In November 2021, a bipartisan group of US lawmakers introduced the Filter Bubble Transparency Act. The act would require large platforms to let people use a version of their services where content is not selected by so-called opaque algorithms. Opaque algorithms are defined in the proposed act as algorithms that make inferences based on user-specific data to select content a user sees. In other words, the act would require large social media companies to make a version of their services available that does not rely on recommender systems generated by user-specific content. The bill would also require social media services employing such algorithms to inform the user of their use and how they operate. More recently, in January 2022, a group of US senators tabled the Algorithmic Accountability Act. This bill would require companies to conduct ongoing impact assessments of AI systems to detect and mitigate bias, and to evaluate overall performance, as well as a host of other factors. This is just a brief overview of only a handful of the leading initiatives to regulate AI globally, and you can be sure it is only the beginning. To end our time, I would like to close with a few comments on the challenge of regulating AI to help animate broader discussion. First, confronting the speed, complexity, and scale of AI operations with traditional regulatory tools is going to be tough. Manual processes, such as human inspection, risk and impact assessments, simply cannot keep pace with the challenges of governing a highly dynamic, unpredictable, and rapidly evolving technology like AI. Instead, we will almost certainly need to invest in the development of new regulatory technologies and tools that can help operationalize standards and automate aspects of conformity assessments for AI companies at scale. Second, it's hard to regulate what you haven't tested and measured. We need greater transparency into the practices of companies and their use of AI systems. In addition, we need to have a better understanding of the impacts of the AI systems, which are often unique across domains, applications, and use cases. Third, international coordination on the development of technical standards, conformity assessments, and other means of compliance, such as regulatory technologies, is needed to ensure global interoperability of AI regulatory frameworks to facilitate international trade and investment. In summary, we've come a long way from developing AI principles. The challenge is now to translate those principles into practice and to incentivize the development of innovative compliance tools that will enable effective AI regulation and governance at scale. Thank you.